Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Thank you for joining me for this continuing discussion on 30 days to a better you. So far, we've been talking about controlling the tongue, and now we move on to feeding the mind. And under feeding the mind, the first thing I want to deal with is looking at things from another person's perspective. I want to start with an interesting story from the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that will take a moment to unpack, and then we will draw some conclusions from that. The Prophet, peace be upon him, as you will recall, was born in Mecca. He was not welcome in his hometown with his new message about Islam. And so he had to leave. He and some of his faithful followers, they migrated to Medina. They were called Muhajirun, migrants. And then in Medina, there were the Ansars, the helpers, those who took in the migrants and gave them a place to live and, allow them to thrive in their new town. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, eventually marched back into Mecca, and he was victorious there without any battle. He took over the city. But there was still an enduring threat from some of the other people in the outskirts, like the Hawazin people and the Thaqif people. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, marched against them as well. Now, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, had entered Mecca, the folks in Mecca who had long resisted him now realized that the resistance was futile. And so they embraced Islam. So many of those who embraced Islam at this time were kind of like lukewarm. They're just fresh in the religion. And when the Prophet, peace be upon him, marched against those other outlying tribes, the Hawazin and the Thaqif, some of those Quraysh people, the Prophet's people from the Prophet's own tribe, who had once resisted Islam and who had now just accepted Islam, marched along with him as well. They were part of that army. So when the Prophet, peace be upon him, then eventually defeated the Hawazin and Thaqif people, and now it was time to distribute the spoils from the battle, the Prophet, peace be upon him, gave large portions to those new Muslims, many of whom were related to the Prophet, peace be upon him. So now you can imagine the disquiet that this would give rise to. Those Ansar people, the helpers who are from Medina, who had taken the Prophet, peace be upon him, in when he was rejected by his own people, they felt some unease about this, and they started to murmur among themselves. And word reached the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In fact, one of them came and put the matter before the Prophet, peace be upon him. This is what the people are saying. And then the Prophet, peace be upon him, asked him, okay, so what about you? What do you say? And the Prophet, the man said, you know what, I'm of the same view. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, called them all together, and he said to them, look, weren't you destitute, but God has enriched you? Weren't you misguided, and God has, through me, has guided you? And so on. So he started to tell them about the benefits of the faith that they had received. And then, interestingly enough, he said, okay, now you talk back to me. Tell me something in response. So they were surprised, like, Messenger of God, what can we say to you in response? He said, you could tell me, and what you say would be true and would be believed, meaning I'll agree with you, that you can tell me that, you, that is the Prophet, were driven out and we took you in. You were rejected, but we believed in you. And you were destitute, but we provided for you, and so on. And he started to list more things. So he had listed something like 3 things which are of benefit to the people through him. And now he listed something like 5 ways in which the people can come back at him and say that this is how we helped you. And now when the axe drops, this is how you treat us, like you favor your family over us. So when the Prophet, peace be upon him, spoke like this, the people were, taken aback and they broke out in tears. And the Prophet consoled them by saying, look, isn't it enough that the other people are going away with the sheep and goats, but you are taking the Prophet of God back with you to your town. And it's a moving story for me as well. But what it all illustrates for me is the prophet's ability to see things from the perspective of the other people. So, he had a perspective in mind. He could see the broader picture of Islam and the nascent Islamic community that needed to be strong and needed to grow. And there were new Muslims who just came in. They needed to be assuaged. The Quran, even in Surah 9, verse number 60, makes an allowance for the charitable funds to be given to people who are new to the faith. They are called al-mu'allafatul qulub, whose hearts are to be reconciled. So one way of, solidifying their commitment to Islam is to give them some charity. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, was doing that. But he was able to see that this disquiet from the part of the Ansars, could come from their thinking the way that he described. This is how you can come back to me. This is what you can say to me. That means he was able to look at the matter from their perspective, and he's able to recount to them, this is how I'm sure it looks to you. And you are right in that. So often we tend to see things only from our perspective, and this causes alienation between us and other people. We don't understand them, and they don't understand us, and there is always some kind of tension. But the Prophet, peace be upon him, had this ability. So let's cultivate that ability as one of the habits that we can develop during the month of Ramadan. Let's try to see things from the perspectives of other people. If we see someone doing something wrong, what might we say to ourselves? We can say, okay, these people don't know what they're doing, they have no brains and whatever. But in another vein, we could say, okay, they must have some good reasons for doing that. Let's try to investigate. Let's try to think about it. Let's try to find out what good reasons they could have for doing that. And by turning the matter around and looking at it from the other person's perspective, we might come to a better understanding and appreciation of other people, and the tensions between us and misunderstandings between us and others would be vastly reduced. So continue to join me for this discussion on 30 Days to a Better You. And next time around, we'll be looking at reading diverse sources. So be sure to join me tomorrow, God willing. Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum. On behalf of Let the Quran Speak, I want to say thank you for supporting us. Please continue to support us this Ramadan. May God bless you and your loved ones with the very best always, and may you draw ever closer to God this Ramadan.